Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here to talk about two of the things that I'm most passionate about, or very passionate about. One is science, and one is God. And I hope to at least relay some of the reasons why I'm passionate about those two things. I realize I'm here at Bath, which is a great university for science, a great science university, and so it's a pleasure for me to be here for that reason. And the very first thing I'm going to tell you about is one of the most beautiful parts of the universe, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, something that still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. And that's this. There'll be an exam at the end. This is one of my great heroes, Paul Dirac, a mathematical physicist in Cambridge. And in the late 1920s, Dirac started thinking about the following question. So you're probably all familiar with Einstein's special relativity, the theory of very fast things, right? What happens when things move close to the speed of light? Don't you may also realize, how many of you have heard of the Schrodinger Equation? Good, that's good. So that's not I like to speak in places like this. Educated audience. The Schrodinger Equation is a theory that Erwin Schrödinger came up with. It explains very, very small things, quantum mechanics, the electron. In principle, you can derive things like chemistry from the Schrodinger Equation. It's one of the great intellectual achievements of mankind. And Dirac did the following thought experiment. He said, what if I take an electron, something very small, described by the Schrodinger Equation. This is the energy equation for the electron. And I want to make it transform according to the Einstein's special relativity. So this is E is mc squared, so the square root of mc squared is E is mc squared. Plus this term right here, which is the momentum term, and all you want to do is to make sure that this energy and that energy transform according to the same rules when things go fast. So, when I was an undergraduate, I've always loved quantum mechanics. I think I taught myself quantum mechanics in secondary school, so much I loved it. But I hadn't done this part yet, I hadn't done relativity. And so when I was an undergraduate, I remember reading this derivation and thinking, that's cool, let me work that through. Now what's interesting about what happens when you combine these two things is you get this particular equation, which I'm not going to bore you with the details of, except to say these are a particular algebra, and the only way you can make the Schrodinger equation transform according to the laws of special relativity is if you have not only the electrons, where two components spin up and spin down, but something else, a second component, spin up and spin down. So rather than having you need four components in your equations. And Dirac, being a great mathematical physicist, said, well, that's what the mathematics says, that must be the way the world is, and he published his famous equation. And just a few years later, in 1931, Carl Anderson at Caltech discovered the positron, which is this other thing right here. Now, positrons are antimatter. So electrons and positrons, they annihilate each other. They're used in, if you have PET scans, positron emission tomography, it's using antimatter. So what Dirac basically discovered, theoretically, was antimatter, something so crazy that nobody could have imagined it really in their wildest dreams, and yet we discovered it by mathematics. And I still think this is one of the most beautiful things in the universe. I think it dwarfs, mountains and all kinds of other things that you see, which are also beautiful. It's just unbelievably, elegantly beautiful, because this incredible intricacy of the mathematical world, something we have in our heads, forces on nature this incredible structure of antimatter. And I remember as an undergraduate thinking, well, that cannot be true. Dirac must have missed something. And with the typical hubris of youth, which I think is a good thing sometimes, I spent the whole night trying to prove Dirac wrong. Until in the early morning, I had to bow to the great master and realize this was really the only way that it worked. So that's what physicists sometimes call the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, a gift which we neither understand nor deserve, the words of Eugene Wigner, a famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And so, I think science is unbelievably beautiful. I'm very privileged that I get paid money to think about these kinds of things. In fact, it's not your money yet, but some of you will go earn real money and pay taxes, and that will pay people like myself. So I'm going to tell you already in advance, I'm very grateful. In fact, a generation or two ago, I would have had to be independently wealthy to do this. now me, a simple boy from Holland, can get paid to think about these kind of things. And I think that is really something spectacular and beautiful. There's one message that I want you to get from this talk, is that science is unbelievably beautiful. It's the kind of thing that's really worth dedicating your life to. Now, it's actually quite natural when you see the power of science, which is what you see right here, to ask yourself, will science maybe one day explain everything about life that's important? Not just the existence of antimatter, but maybe everything that's important. And here's one of my colleagues whose textbooks you may have used if you're a chemist, Peter Atkins. There is no reason to expect that science cannot deal with any aspect of existence. Although poets may aspire to understanding, their talents are more akin to entertaining self-deception. Philosophers too, I'm afraid, have contributed to the understanding of the universe a little more than poets. I long for immortality, but I know that my only hope of achieving it is through science and medicine, not through sentiment and its subsets, art and theology. So here's one of my colleagues, basically saying science is so powerful and beautiful, it will in fact answer all the questions of life, and things like philosophy or theology are going to be eventually barking up the wrong tree. They haven't really contributed anything of importance to the world. And that's actually a common viewpoint, but I want to contrast that with another well-known agnostic or atheist, also from Oxford, the late Sir Peter Menawar, Nobel Prize winner, who in a very famous book called The Limits of Science says that there is indeed a limit on science is made very likely by the existence of questions that science cannot answer, and that no conceivable advance of science can have power to answer. These are the questions that children ask, the ultimate questions of Karl Popper, a philosopher. I have in mind such questions as, how did everything begin? What are we all here for? And what is the point of living? It is not the science, therefore, but the metaphysics, imaginative literature, or religion that must turn to answers for questions having to do with first and last things. And he makes another point which I completely agree with, which is science is a great and glorious enterprise. The most successful, I argue, that human beings have ever engaged in. I think that's really important. But to reproach it for its inability to answer all the questions we should like to put to it is no more reasonable or sensible than to reproach a railway locomotive for not flying, or in general not performing any other operation for which it was not designed. So what you're seeing here with these two dawns is they're saying, one of them is saying science will answer all the questions, including the questions of meaning and of purpose and of value. And the other one says, actually, no matter how far science advances, it will not answer, and no conceivable advance will allow it to answer. And that is wrong to ask it to do so. So, what do they mean by that? Well, I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit in my talk, just by giving some examples. Obviously a complicated topic, and I'll give you a few examples. And one example that I think is a helpful way of thinking about it is to ask you this question. How would you measure the value of a human life? Surely that's an incredibly important question for us in society. What makes a human valuable or less valuable? It's the basis for a lot of our modern law, for human rights, etc. And so, just for the joke, I'll have Sir Peter ask, I'll have Peter Atkins and Peter Menawar, Peter ask Peter, how do you measure the value of a human life? Well, if you're a chemist, you could value the elements in your body. And perhaps if you've got gold fittings, you're worth more than somebody that isn't. But that is surely very naive. If you're a physiologist, I can measure the size of your brain, or a psychologist, how smart you are. An anthropologist, I can see how the community values you. Or if an economist, I can look at how much economic value you reproduce, homo economicus. But I think we all recognize immediately that these are the wrong axes on which to measure the value of the human life. It's really important that human beings have value. It's really important that their value is not derived from some property that they have, or even from the way that society necessarily thinks about them. There has to be something intrinsically valuable to human beings. I think that's an instinct that we all share, and rightly so. Therefore, to requote Schrodinger, it's not a science, but there's something else. Literature, metaphysics, philosophy, religion, that we have to look for answers to these really, really important questions. Another way of thinking about this is to say science derives its power from its limitations. It derives its power by focusing with incredible intensity on particular types of questions, questions that are typically repeatable or amenable to some kind of scientific approach. And the point is that there are many questions, I think many of the most important questions of life, which are not amenable to that type of question. So another way of thinking about that is to say this. It's a picture. This is the second thing I want you to remember from my talk, besides that science is beautiful and worth dedicating your life to, is that it's this analogy. So let's say you come, it's an analogy from a famous Christian philosopher called Alvin Plantinga. He says, imagine that you're walking down a dark street and you come around the corner and there you see a man looking for something. And you ask him, what are you doing? What are you looking for? And he says, I've lost my keys. Can you help me? So two of you look, and after quite a while looking at the lampposts, you haven't found them. So you say to the guy, so excuse me, sir, are you sure you lost your keys here under the lamppost? He says, no, I don't know where I lost them, but here the light is brightest. And the idea that science is the only answer, the only way of reaching the truth is a little bit like that old joke of the drunk looking for the keys under the lamppost because that's where the light is brightest. In fact, what my slightly caricatured atheist friend Atkins said is not only should we look only under the light, but there are no keys anywhere else. And the point is that science is very powerful precisely because it shines a very bright light on certain things. The point also is that the really important questions of life are slightly out in the shadows. It doesn't mean that they're therefore invisible, but they are not necessarily amenable to the scientific method. So that's the next really important point that I want to take away. That is, as powerful, as beautiful as science is, it's not going to answer questions of value, questions of meaning, questions of ultimate purpose. And then I want to bring to another point that I want you to remember, is that we are all philosophers or theologians. From those that don't believe in God, atheologians, to those that believe in some kind of God, we are theologians, we're philosophers. Whether we like it or not, we have views on whether human beings are valuable or not. We have views on what it is to do right or to do wrong. Those views may be coherent views, they may be incoherent views, they may be views we picked up from how we feel, but we have those views and we live our lives according to those views. And the question really is not are you a philosopher or a theologian, but what is your theology and what is your philosophy and how do you make sense of life? So, to unpack some of those questions a little bit, I've got three main points. I may not get to the third one. The first one I want to look at is called vegetarian butchers. The second one is the myth, the zombie myth, the conflict metaphor. So the vegetarian butchers is basically the following point. I'm often asked, how could you be a scientist and a Christian? Aren't those things like being a vegetarian butcher or a pacifist soldier? Something just a contradiction in terms. And there's lots of ways of answering that. One of the ways of looking at that is to look sociologically, so I can look at my colleagues in Oxford. So in Oxford University, in the physics department, I have quite a few colleagues, maybe 15, 20, who are active members, that I know of who are active members of churches. We actually regularly meet and talk about science and faith. And in fact, none of us think that science detracts from our faith. We tend to think that it enhances our faith. So here's just a picture of something that I also work with. It's a course we run for postgraduate students. Here are some of the lectures of us, and so these will all be vegetarian butchers in one way or the other. But I think what we would say is that for us, Christianity is intellectually robust and also existentially satisfying. That's a sociological argument. You may think we're all wrong, but there are a lot of vegetarian butchers around, and that's the point that I want to make. The next thing I want to look at is this myth of the conflict metaphor. Why do people say to me, look at me with some puzzlement when I say that I'm a scientist and I'm a Christian? Why do they think I'm a vegetarian butcher? I think that comes from a myth, which I call a zombie myth, because no matter how much we try to chop it down, it keeps coming up again. I call it the conflict metaphor. And that conflict metaphor rests, I think, on a number of fallacies. I'm going to just pop by you, and you can think about these more later in your discussion. One fallacy is that mechanism exhausts meaning. You come into my house, and the water's boiling, and you ask me, why is the water boiling? And I say to you, well, there's a heat source that transfers thermal energy across the container wall into the liquid. What that then does is the mean square velocity of the water molecules goes up. The mean square velocity of the water molecules is directly proportional to the temperature. When the temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius, there is a phase transition from a condensed phase to an expanded phase, which we call boiling. Now that, just if you're taking notes, is a reasonable answer to a question that you might get in your first year, or perhaps in a thermodynamics course. And that's perfectly fine. That's the mechanisms by which the water is boiling. Why is the water boiling? But you may come into my house and say, well, why is the water boiling? And I say, well, I fancy a cup of tea. Would you like one? And the important point is that just because I explained to you the mechanism by which the water is boiling, doesn't mean that I've ever exhausted the meaning. So if somebody says to you, science has explained this particular mechanism, that's great. I think that is exactly what science ought to be doing. But it's impoverishing to think that therefore I have denuded this thing of its meaning. There can be many layers of meaning. The second kind of fallacy that you see often, I think exacerbates the conflict metaphor, is what we call nothing buttery. So here another illustration. You are a young man here in Bath, you have a young lady that things are going really well with. You're sitting in a restaurant, there's lights are low, there's candles, there's roses. At some point she turns to you and says, you know, Ruben. Ruben. You know, we've been together for quite some time, and you know, I just really want to know how well you understand me, and do you really know what I'm made of? Okay, so just warning, that is a very dangerous question. You sometimes maybe try to avoid the question or distract. If it doesn't work and you're forced, one thing you shouldn't do is fall back on your science. You can say, well, I know what you're made of. You're made of chemicals. The average human being, in fact, is made of enough phosphorus for 2,000 matches, enough iron for 1 nail, enough chlorine to disinfect a swimming pool, and enough fat for 10 bars of soap. That's the point when you will get a slap. Of course, this is true. You are made of these things, but you are not nothing but those things. You are a wet chemical bag of chemicals. You are a biological machine. That is true. But it's not nothing but chemicals. You are not nothing but a biological machine. There's a lot more to you. If somebody says that I've explained that you are that, but the problem is if you say you're nothing but that. So that's the second fallacy. The third fallacy is that the alternative is somehow between science and irrationality. I'll tell you another story. So this is a friend of mine, Bill Newsom. He's a world-famous neuroscientist at Stanford University. And one day, Bill was walking across the Stanford campus. If you've ever been there, they have a beautiful church called Memorial Church. And his colleague said, somewhat in jest, you know, I don't like this church on the campus. We should blow this thing up. It's a monument to irrationality. To which Bill quipped, well, in that case, we should bomb my house, because my house is also a monument to irrationality. And a nice conversation ensued. And what was the point Bill was making? Well, let me give you an example that may unpack this. So, let's say you would like to get married. I recommend. I tried an experiment a few years ago, and I think it's great. Now, is the alternative there between using science to choose a marriage partner or irrationality? Are those the two choices that there are? Well, actually, no. There are irrational ways of choosing a marriage partner. Walking out onto the street and grabbing the best woman you see and say, marry me, is a tremendously irrational thing to do. And if this woman says, yes, that's even more frightening. Instead, what you do is you get to know the person, you see whether you're compatible, you see whether you have similar likes, similar visions for life. You may ask people that you trust, how do you think about the two of us? Science can help a little bit. So my wife and I did these compatibility tests. So over time, you fill out all these different questions like where do you squeeze a toothpaste. It's actually remarkably illuminating. But you don't marry somebody because you both score 95% on the compatibility test. There has to be more to it. Not only that, I couldn't wait until I had scientific certainty whether my wife, Mary, was the right person for me to get married to. Nor should I do repeatable experiments in marriage. It's a bad idea. And the reason for that is a very simple one, which is that there are large aspects of what it's like to be married that are inaccessible to me until I am married. I have to make a step of faith, if you wish, and say yes. And people do this all the time, by the way. And only then will a lot of the evidence for whether this is the right person or not be accessible to me. In other words, if I take on a kind of scientific attitude of skepticism, of not believing something until evidence is shown for it, there's a lot of evidence that I will never see. And it's interesting that those of us that are Christians would say that is the kind of decisions, the kind of thinking that you often do when thinking about something like whether you're going to make a faith commitment. You do need to think. There are irrational ways of doing it. Just believing something because for no apparent reason. Reason is really important. But there are aspects to knowledge, aspects to religious knowledge, which are only available to you relationally. There are aspects of knowledge which are only available to you after you've made some kind of commitment. And I think that is the way that most important decisions in life actually are. That's the character of the world. That is the way the world simply is. And so that is, I think, a really important point, that it's not science versus rationality. It's science is one way of, a very powerful way of getting knowledge about certain types of questions. There are good and less good ways of getting knowledge about all kinds of other questions that are important in life. But science is not the arbiter of the right way of thinking about it. And here's another colleague of mine who has a related, I'll call this a related fallacy, that I just explored, blind faith or balanced reason. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is in belief in spite of, or even because of, the lack of evidence. And so, what I'm hoping to argue with you is that I think that is a fallacy. It's not that it's one versus the other. One of them, there's just different ways of obtaining reliable knowledge about the world. And for most ways that we attain reliable knowledge about the world involve steps of commitment, steps of what we would call faith, which are reasonable and for which the evidence grows after, and evidence only available to you after you've made that kind of commitment. In other words, most of the world is not illuminated by this very bright light of repeatable experiments. Most of the way that we live is not, cannot be contained or can be understood as scientific method. Those are questions of value, questions of how we should live our lives, questions of what's the meaning of life, the question of what is life about, the question of who we should marry. All those kinds of really important questions are not accessible by the scientific method. All right. So that was the main point I wanted to get across to you. I want to just unpack a few other things about the zombie myth, which are more historical. So here's another colleague of mine from Oxford, Peter Harrison, or just left actually sadly, but he's still a good friend, who said, he's one of the world's leading historians of science, who said, those who argue for the incompatibility of science and religion will draw little comfort from history. The myth of a perennial conflict between science and religion is one to which no historian of science would subscribe. In fact, Peter and 25 other leading historians of science wrote a book a few years ago. It was called Galileo Goes to Jail, and 25 other myths about science and religion, where they try to chop down this zombie myth that science and faith historically have been at loggerheads. That somehow we came out of this fog of rationalism and the great science cleared everything up for us. In fact, if you think about it, science has deep Christian roots. And these are roots like uniformity. So you're so used to this idea today that you don't even realize that it was something that you kind of learned from your mother's milk. In other words, if I do an experiment in Oxford and somebody else in Cambridge does experiments under the same conditions, if they're smart, they should get the same results. Okay? And that's because the world is uniform. But that is not at all obvious to most people in most time, because the nature does not seem to be that way. Nature seems to be capricious. And so for most of history, people did not have, that seemed to be a very irrational thing to think about the natural world. And you can show that the history of modern science is built on theological reflection, and that theological reflection was, if there is a God who created the world and who sustains the world, in other words, if when we're studying the regular ways that God sustains the world, we might expect there to be a regularity in there if there is a God who's faithful. Therefore, we expect regularity, we expect uniformity in the natural world. And those theological ideas are what drove the early scientists to try to do what we all call modern science, what you are all used to having and calling modern science. But those metaphysical roots, which are really important assumptions that you bring to the table in order to do science, have a very natural grounding in a theistic worldview. They could ground it in other ways. You could just assume them as brute facts about the world if you're a naturalist. But they're historically, this is the way they came into our world. And we see this with great scientists like Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, who was a very unorthodox theologian, but hugely different by his theology. He wrote more about theology than he wrote about science. Or Robert Boyle, who lived not too far from me in Oxford, the father of modern chemistry, Boyle's law, who in fact was deeply driven by his Christian faith, wanted to support kind of missionary type activities And you'll see that many of the founders of the Royal Society were much more religious than the average person of their time. They were driven by their Christian faith. And so the point I want to make is just I'm trying to chop at this zombie fact of the zombie myth of the conflict between science and religion and say that is basically a myth. It's not something, it's not the right way of thinking about the way the world is. The question then is, how do you think about the way the world is? What could you do? And that is not my main point today. I'm just trying to clear the ground a little bit for you to think about these really important questions. And I'm going to give you one example of how not to do it, one lost fallacy. And that will hopefully give you an idea about how you might go about thinking about these big questions of life. So again, it's my colleague Richard Dawkins, whom I do appreciate, because I think he is right in pointing out to us that we need to think very hard about this question of whether there is or isn't a God. And so I think we're both on exactly on the same page that we both think that apathy about this question is wrong. We just happen to have different ways that we think about where this comes from. And he said famously, if you want to believe in teapots, pink unicorns, tooth fairies, or Thor or Yahweh, the onus is on you to say why you believe in it. The onus is not on the rest of us to say why we do not. We who are atheists are also atheists, ateapotists, and unicornists. We don't have to bother saying so. It's beautiful use of language. And that's a natural, I find this in my discussions with students, it's a very natural place to come from. The idea is that the onus is on the theist, on me, to give you evidence for God, and that somehow the default option is that there is no God. And I'm going to say that that is the wrong way of thinking about this question. The problem is, in fact, not the evidence. The problem is how do you weigh the evidence. And here I'm going to quote another great physicist, John Polkinghorne, who said, if we were to understand the nature of reality, we have only two possible starting points. Either the brute fact of the physical world, or the brute fact of the divine will and purpose behind that physical world. In other words, what he says is, there is no view from nowhere. You either have to say, I'm going to assume there's a God behind the world, and I look at the world and see, does this make more sense of the way the world is? Does this resonate better with the way the world is, the evidence? Does it weave it together better into a tapestry? Or do I say there is no God, and then do I look at the world, and does that make more or less sense of the world? And my argument would be that that is the way to adjudicate this question. There is no onus on one or onus on the other. Rather, we have to take one of these starting points and see which of the two makes the most rational sense of the world. And I would argue that theism gives a natural home for modern science. It naturally explains why the world is uniform, it explains why the world is intelligible, why you can understand things like the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. All those things come in very natural. If you believe that there are moral truths in this world, like killing innocent children for fun, or torturing innocent children for fun, is always wrong, independent of the cultural background. If you believe that's true, then it very naturally falls from within a theistic point of view. If you believe there is no God, then you have to find other reasons for believing in uniformity, or rationality, or intelligibility, or moral truths, or a series of other things about this natural world. You can make those as assumptions, but you need to be able to weave together a tapestry of all those things that makes more sense than the tapestry that starts from the idea that there is a God behind the world. And the problem with a pink unicorn fallacy is exactly this. So, is God like something out there that you can be skeptical about and just assume there is no God until I give you evidence for it? Well, in science that isn't indeed the case. If I come to you and say, I've discovered this new equation in my lab that explains something really amazing, you're right to be skeptical about it until I give you evidence for it. But if there is a God who is the source of all being, the God for whom and by whom we exist, that's something in a totally different category. It's a different thing entirely. And the way of adjudicating that is the way I just told you, of starting from one of these two points of view and then looking up. And so that is a very quick sketch of how you might try to weave together the evidence, the arguments for the existence of God, for Jesus Christ, for the reliability of Scripture, and think whether that makes more sense of the world, is more rational or less rational. That's the reason I believe, that's why I think Christianity is intellectually robust, and why I believe it's also existentially satisfying. And then my 30 minutes are up. I thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to your questions.